This video is Chapter 3, Part 1 notes. It's all about the different types of molecules that are found in cells. Types of molecules fall into a few broad categories, of which we will see examples for pretty much the remainder of the year together. First up, organic molecules are those that contain carbon. Organic molecules tend to be molecules related to living things, which of course we are studying in biology, living things. So you'll see that all of the types of molecules we talk about contain carbon. You might remember from chemistry that one of carbon's unique properties is that it has 4 valence electrons, meaning that it can form up to 4 different bonds. This then means that carbon can bond with a variety of different atoms to make a whole set of diverse molecules. We will talk in this chapter about 4 main groups of molecules that contain carbon. They all are big molecules found in cells. Monomers is a vocab term that indicates a small unit. The prefix mono means one, so a monomer is a small unit that gets linked together to make a bigger molecule. Those bigger molecules are called polymers, poly meaning a chain. So if you use this picture here, you can see that the monomer unit gets repeated many times in the polymer. So it's almost like a monomer is a link in a chain, and then the whole chain I would call a polymer. So poly means many, mono means one. For example, proteins, which we'll talk more about here in the coming days, proteins are made of units linked together. Many proteins are big in terms of cell size, meaning they're pretty big particles, and they're made of these individual units called amino acids that get linked together to make a chain. The chain is what I would call a protein. All right, so how does that occur? There's 2 main types of reactions, dehydration and hydrolysis. You'll be expected to know the difference between these two. In a dehydration reaction, water is lost. So I always think like when I'm dehydrated, I don't have water, all my water has left me. So in a dehydration reaction, water is removed, meaning that water is one of the products. A dehydration reaction is one in which monomers get linked together. When those monomers get linked together, a hydroxide and a hydrogen from them get taken off, which is where that water molecule comes from. So in dehydration, I am building a polymer. I am making bonds that were not there before. So I have made this bond between monomer 3 and monomer 4. In the process, water is released as garbage. The opposite is hydrolysis. Hydro means water. Lysis means to break. So hydrolysis is when water comes in and water breaks a bond. The components of that water molecule are then tacked on to those monomers. So a hydrolysis reaction is breaking, meaning I am breaking a polymer apart. An easy way to remember this is like when you're eating. When you're eating all of these long chains. It's helpful to drink water or drink something while you're eating because water will help to break those bonds apart. So a hydrolysis reaction breaks bonds by using water. There's 4 main groups of macromolecules that we will talk about, the first of which is carbohydrates. Definitely a word you have heard before. Carbohydrates are sugars. The majority of organisms on planet Earth get their energy from sugar. So the number one source of energy is carbohydrates. Plants build sugar using energy from the sun, and then other organisms eat those sugars or eat the animals that ate those sugars. Carbohydrates are made only of three elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And carbohydrates are polymers. They are polymers made of repeating units. A single sugar, a single monomer, we call a monosaccharide. Saccharide means sugar, mono means one. So a glucose molecule that's built by a plant is considered a monosaccharide. It is one single ring, such as like this one here. Some organisms then will undergo reactions to use those single sugars to build disaccharides. Di meaning two. A sugar made of two units, such as maltose here, or sucrose, or lactose is a disaccharide. So disaccharides are two monomers linked together. How do they get linked together? Through that dehydration reaction. Water is removed, as shown here, to build a polymer. In this case, it's a disaccharide. Poly means many, so polysaccharides are many sugar units. Polysaccharides are long chains. There's some examples of which here, but the idea is that they are repeating units, all made from individual monomers. So to conclude carbohydrates, although there are multiple functions of carbohydrates in organisms, the main function is energy, releases energy. Second group of macromolecules are lipids. Lipids are fats. They are fats that are used for long-term energy storage. A lot of animals that eat only every so often, like a great white shark, a killer whale, a polar bear, they're not necessarily eating every single day. So they tend to have a lot of blubber, a lot of fat storage, so that they can go long periods of time without eating. Lipids also act as cushioning. Like if you take a punch, it's ideal for your heart to not feel the fist on it. So you of course have bones to protect you, but also you've got some fat layers to protect those essential organs. Fats are also used for insulation, meaning like to keep organisms warm. Like carbohydrates, lipids are made of the same three elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They are also hydrophobic, meaning that they don't mix with water. You guys have seen oil mixed with water, like when you're baking or when there's an oil spill, and always in the water, the oil accumulates on the top. They don't mix. So that's a very important property of lipids. They're hydrophobic, meaning they don't mix with water. Hydro means water. Phobic or a phobia is like a fear, like arachnophobia is a fear of spiders. Hydrophobic, fear of water, meaning in biology sense, it doesn't mix with water. Fats can be classified as either saturated or unsaturated. This isn't like a huge important idea, but just the idea that different bonds can form between the monomers, thus allowing the fats to have different property. Generally, fats that come from animals are solid, like butter, lard, more solid. They tend to have saturated carbons, which means that every carbon has 4 bonds. And unsaturated fat tend to be plant fats, and they tend to have a double bond between carbons, which just causes like a kink in the chain, changes the shape of the chain so that they tend to be liquids at room temperature. One other important function of lipids is that they make up membranes in cells. Since lipids are hydrophobic, they have an area that doesn't mix with water. They can act as a barrier between what's happening inside and outside of a cell. We'll talk more about the cell membrane in a coming unit, but there's a whole zone of hydrophobic tails in the cell membrane, which keeps liquid inside of the cell separate from liquid outside of the cell. So every membrane in the cell is made of these lipids, especially because of the fact that they don't mix with water. Proteins are the third group of macromolecule. More on proteins will come in the next video. Proteins are hugely important when studying biology because proteins do every single job inside of a cell. So anything you think about a cell doing is done because of proteins. Proteins are what DNA codes for. So DNA is like a set of instructions, and then proteins is what's built with those instructions to carry out a job. If you only had DNA and no proteins, the cell could do nothing. Like for real, nothing. Proteins are what the DNA makes. Proteins are made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and some of them have sulfur. So they're a little bit more diverse than carbohydrates and lipids. We will hear about proteins till the end of May together because proteins do so many jobs. Proteins are also polymers. Carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins are all polymers. They are proteins made of repeating units called amino acids. We looked at those a little bit when we were studying evolution, and we said that organisms that have similar amino acids are probably related in terms of evolution, indicating that their DNA is somewhat similar. Another word for a protein is a polypeptide, poly meaning many, peptide referring to the bond that's in a protein. Just like our other polymers, the way that we connect monomers, here I've got a monomer and a monomer that I want to connect, is through a dehydration reaction. So it doesn't matter which group of macromolecule I'm looking at, they get made by a dehydration reaction. We will pick up more on proteins in the next video, but I'd like to end with the idea that the fourth and final group of macromolecule is a nucleic acid. Nucleic acid, meaning Na, meaning the Na in DNA and the Na in RNA. Information about DNA and RNA is hugely important to this course, so we will study that in a lot of detail second semester. For now, it's the fourth group of macromolecule. We'll hit it more in the future. So that concludes this set of notes.